So, let's talk a little bit as we're kind of getting into this. Let's look at some of this and just kind of in general on how we can manage some of the special challenges and how we can feel well during this time. We want to kind of get into some of this. And I didn't introduce myself earlier. My name is Dr. Holland, and I'm one of the faculty members in the School of Psychology and Counseling. And so let's take a quick look at it and look at some of the things we can do during this season. First of all, we want to make sure that we are managing some of the special challenges. There's a lot of challenges that are very unique to what we're experiencing right now in this pandemic. And so there's some things we definitely want to take advantage of and try to make sure we can understand about the uniqueness of this specific time. One of them is that we want to think of this like the winter, not like a blizzard. Where we live, people get ready for a storm and they stock up on supplies and these things. And even now during this event, we've seen it. And we've even seen people look at the media and think, well, maybe 14 days or a couple more days, wondering how many days it's going to be until we're able to actually, be free from this and have everything done, and those things, again, are kind of complicated to look at because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something a little bit greater than that with timing and some of the time frames of things that are going on. And so we want to understand that we're really thinking more winter, long-term, some things that might be going on that are kind of critical and things that we can kind of get ourselves involved in and make sure we understand the dynamics of. The second thing is understand what you have control of and what predictability is, and it's kind of the dynamic of this too. So when you're managing the special circumstances surrounding this event, realize that everybody in the world has gone through a time where we have lost control of things that we've generally had great control over, and we've lost a lot of the predictable things in our life. Control and predictability are critical to feeling well and having routines that are stability for us. So we all have a limited capacity for stress. We've got like a container. We have so much that we can experience. And what happens is when we lose control and predictability in areas of our life that we once had them, we immediately start to fill up that capacity. And what we find is that once we get toward the top of that capacity, things begin to overflow. And so we may see that just from sheltering in place or from quarantines and different types of situations. We may begin to experience some of those times when we have a limited capacity for stress. And so when we're trying to manage a lot of the challenges unique to this, we have to realize that people around us all have different size containers of what we can hold for stress. And that as we go through this together, we're all experiencing a similar level of loss of control and predictability in our lives. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at everything and control the controllables. What is it that we can control? What do we have influence over right now? Those are the things we want to focus on. The other things that we really can't control, we want to let go of. We don't want to invest our energy into those areas. We want to invest our mind, our heart, and our time into the things that we actually have influence over. And so we're going to get into specifics on that in a minute too, because that's going to help us create the new normal. During this season, we're going to have to create a new version of what's normal for us, because a lot of what was normal before this came is taken away from us. We may have gone to certain restaurants on a weekly basis or met up with certain friends, or maybe it was the way we worshiped on Sunday. Whatever it is, those things have changed and become different. And so we have to come up with what that's going to look like for us now as well too. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but we want to let go of the rest of those things. And that's where I come into the next point of it's time to prune your energy. Like a tree or a bush, we have enough sap inside of us from God to be able to produce the fruit that he wants us to produce. But what we have to do is we have to cut away the ideas, the thoughts, the branches that we don't want to produce fruit in order to direct that energy where it can produce fruit. So we want to take the time to do that. When we're trying to manage a lot of these things that are unique to this season, we want to say, okay, where can we invest this energy that it's going to produce some kind of fruit, which is why we want to control what we can control. We want to invest it carefully and proactively in things that will produce the fruit we want. So one thing we want to do, and we're going to get into a little bit later too, is focus on your strengths. You know, it's so easy for us to focus on the negative. And instead we want to take the strengths and say, okay, what do I have control over? What's strong in me? What is helpful? How am I a good friend to others? What are the things I can do? And invest our time into that and say, okay, what is it that is working right now? And instead of focusing on the overwhelming and resounding voice of what's not controllable and what is scary, what is it that we have control over? And then what we want to do is we want to respond instead of reacting. Almost every time we react, just a routine reaction, we probably have some sort of outcome that is not really as desirable. Reactions are not generally the best in creating the outcomes we want. And so we want to take the time to respond. We want to manage the anxiety and the fear and all the things we hear and the feelings we may have that come up. And we want to say, okay, what is it we have influence over? And then respond by taking energy and directing it where we can actually have influence. Those are some trips we can do in those times. But how do we feel well? You know, all this stuff going on, a lot of the scary media things going on, how can we feel well? First, we have to manage our fears and our worries. We've got to take control and manage them. We can't necessarily take away a lot of the scary things, but we can manage those feelings. You know, I like to say that when this happened, it's a lot like driving a car. And when you're driving a car and something happens in the roadway ahead of you, you may have been thinking how you're going to get to your destination, where the traffic points are going to be. But as soon as you see something that's unusual, something that is different than what you normally experience driving, we immediately do what? We take our foot off the gas and we look and say, should I be in the right lane, the left lane? Is traffic stopping? Where do I need to be? We immediately look in the moment and stare right in front of us and say, what is it I need to be doing? But right now, all around the world, everyone has taken their foot off the gas. They've taken their energy away from what was producing fruit, what was bringing them pleasure, what was their sense of purpose, things they were achieving. And they immediately look around and go, whoa, what am I supposed to do right now? And so we want to manage those fears that cause us to do that. And that's a reaction that we have to immediately do it. Not the good reaction, you're driving a car, because it slows your speed down and gives you more time to think. But what we want to do at this point is start saying, okay, how can I take control of my feelings again? And what is it I can do? Because fear and panic have an impact on rational thinking. When we start getting afraid or anxious or worried, the part of the brain that gets active is way in the back of the brain. And it is a part of the brain that is responsible for fight, flight, freeze, and all those other things that are useful in a critical emergency. The problem is that the front part of the brain that makes the really good decisions, it actually turns off during those times because the body's getting efficient and it wants to give all the energy to the muscles and quickly do something. That's great if there's a quick threat. But the problem is, this is not the blizzard. This is a winter. This is a new way of doing things. Although temporary, this is a new way of doing things. And so when the fear and the panic take over, we have to realize the part of the brain that's active is not the part of the brain that makes the best decisions. And so when we can calm those irrational fears and we can calm those anxieties and those worries, we can then get the front part of the brain working again, and we can actually make good decisions. So we want to make sure we are controlling anxiety. We want to make sure that we understand what anxiety is. Because here's the trick to dealing with anxiety. Anxiety is not data-driven. It doesn't work on facts. It works on strong feelings, triggers. So when we have an anxious thought or a feeling, it's not predictive of what might happen. Something tragic or something catastrophic is no more likely to happen because we're worried about it. Our anxiety does not predict what actually happens. It's just based on a feeling. And so when we realize this is anxiety and this is fact, we can then act on what we know is actually true. And we can stop the part of the brain from taking over and hijacking our thinking. And we can get back to making good decisions. Because in this season, if we're going to feel well, we're going to need the best versions of our brain to do so. One thing we like to do, though, is to focus on what we call media hygiene. Dr. Lee talked about washing your hands and hygiene, and all the different things we can do and react. And, Dr. Jones talked about the processes of how the viruses get passed and different things. But what we really need to think about here is when we're trying to feel good in this moment, is to really police what kind of hygiene we have for our media, because we can be overwhelmed with images, with things and thoughts. Now, they may be accurate, but if we get an overwhelming sense of that in our minds, it can affect the way we feel and it can affect the way we think. So this is a season where we really need to have that hygiene. We need to limit the amount of time, especially for kids, if you're a parent, limiting how much media they're consuming about this type of event or how much we're consuming in front of them. And then what we need to do is focus on the data. Dr. Jones talked about this too. We want to focus on what's actually true and accurate right now, not focusing on what the fear might be or the latest numbers even. Those things can be helpful to understand the severity of what's going on. In fact, a lot of media outlets have this balance. How much do they tell us? Because what we know from the data that's out is that people actually, when they see these images, when they hear these stories, when somebody's on social media who has it, talks to you about how serious it is, people increase their social distancing. So people respond to some of the fear. And so in order to stop this, response of what we can do, like social distancing and hygiene, those are the two things that are our weapons against this. They're more active during times when people are afraid. However, too much of the fear will cause an unwarranted fear of anxiety. And so we can prune the idea of the fear and say, okay, what can I do right now to keep my family safe? What can I do to feel good in this moment, even though this is a very, very difficult time for our world? And what we can do is respond by focusing on that data and protecting our mind. And then once we have the data, we can decide what the best response is instead of reacting. Instead of just doing something random and stocking up on toilet paper or going to the store and buying all of a product or something. Before we do something that may be irrational, we need to stop and say, okay, what do we actually need to do right now based on the data? And what sources am I going to continue to consider in order to make the best decisions for myself and my family? These are things we can do to manage our fears and our worries, and that's what we want to focus on. And then what we want is the intentional response. In other words, we want to put our foot back on the gas. Now, we don't want to do it randomly because we know a lot of people putting their foot on the gas over to Costco to store up toilet paper. That's not going to be helpful in stopping the spread of a virus or keeping our family safer. So what do? We put our foot back on the gas, but we want it to be very, very intentional in the areas that we can control, that can create some predictability for us and can actually keep us safer. So those are things we want to do, but it's going to have to be something in our control. What can we do now to have a sense of control? Because when we have control in our life, even in a pandemic, and we can begin to activate that and do some things that create meaning for us and create some good outcomes and give us a sense of connection, when we can do that, we can begin to have a sense of feeling of peace about this and start to feel okay in this moment. And so we want to focus on the here and now, not on numbers that may occur in 18 months, how many people may die. Those are great things for the medical community to look at and make some decisions on, and even inform some of the best practices that Dr. Lee and Dr. Jones have already shared with us from the sources that are looking at this, trying to do the best they can to control it and mitigate it and stop it. So what do? We end up focusing on the here and now and saying, right now where I'm at, what can I do to create a new normal? How can I get a routine together? Now, if you have kids who are out of school, one of the best things if they're old enough is to help them start to make their own routines. Give them a sense of control over their education, since a lot of that control has been taken from them. For us, it might be self-care activities. You may have loved going to the gym. You may have loved hanging out with your friends. There are many things you may have done for self-care that are not accessible to you right now. So what do? So what we do is we say, okay, what are things I can do now? How can I build them into my routine? And how can I create what's new? So we want new routines, new predictable scenarios. We may do, if every Tuesday night you had dinner at your parents' house or a friend's house, you may want Tuesday night everybody eat at their own house and they all join together on Zoom and they all connect in that way. But it's going to be different. It's going to be something new. What are those things we can do now to create those intentional responses to begin to feel good? A lot of that's going to come from taking control of what you can and managing the thoughts about the things that we can't. Another thing we can do is really continue the social support during social distancing. What do I mean by that? How do we support it? Because right now we can be so focused on the negative of what we're lacking, what we used to be able to do, and that we feel that sense of loss. And there is a sense of loss. We feel more isolated than ever. Now, if you're an introvert, you've probably prepared your entire life for what you're going through right now, and you have no expectations of social interaction, and you may be loving life right now. Finally, it's where you want it to be. But for the rest of us extroverts, we are in a really rough place right now as we attempt to try to find new ways to connect that bring us so much pleasure and a sense of refilling of our lives. So people are all different. And we need to look at this and say, okay, how can we be socially supporting each other while we're social distancing at the same time? So like I said, things are going to be different. We're going to create a new way of doing that. It may be by video. It may be by phone. Those type of things might be what we end up doing to try to make sure we are honoring the social distancing, doing our part to stop the spread of this, at the same time, not neglecting those connections with others. The natural daily connections that we used to have now require intentional action. So there's a whole level of intentional action we need to do in order to have those connections. Things we have to do and do differently. We may, if you see a counselor, you may be doing it by video, by telehealth. That's a different change. You're connecting with friends that you may do, or colleagues at work. You may do your meetings over different video type of platforms. But whatever we do, we have to do it a little bit differently and with intentionality to do it too. And I would encourage you, reach out. If you want to talk to somebody, a therapist, a pastor, they're even more accessible than ever right now, being online and ready to talk to you. Reach out, have those connections, talk to people, develop that social network you may have that you can develop a sense of well-being and a sense of connection with others. We were never designed to walk through life alone. We are, as people, are designed to have a relationship with our Creator, with God, and relationship with others. And so it's important that we now become more intentional at making sure those connections happen. And finally, don't assume everything's okay. Don't assume everybody's fine. In fact, do the exact opposite. Check in with your people, whoever your people are. Make sure you're checking in. Make sure you're asking them how they're doing. Make sure you're having that sense of connection, those touches. Even if you may not need it, they may need it. So make sure you're reaching out when you can too. And help make sense of things, making meaning during these times. So avoid getting stuck in the negative. So the negative violates the norm. Generally, everything goes well for us. Normally, everything's good. I really doubt any of you woke up this morning and said, man, my right arm feels amazing. We didn't do that. What violates the norm of good is the negative. And don't get stuck in the negative. It's so easy during this time to get caught up in what we can't do, what we're not allowed to do, what our governors and our leaders have told us we can't do. Instead, switch over and create your own narrative about this. In other words, you write the story of how this goes in your mind, and it doesn't need to be wrapped around the negative and the limitations. The limitations are designed to stop the disease process from taking lives. But we can write a story about that that's different. So we want to always balance that faith and fear. Reframe our story from a biblical point of view. C.S. Lewis wrote, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but he shouts in our pain. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It's not that God causes these types of events to occur, but during these times, God can use them to speak to people and to make us all aware that we're not as in control of our destiny in life, and life can be unpredictable. So there's things in scripture that are interesting to know too. Isaiah 45:3 is one of my favorite verses, talk about feeling well in this time. I will give you the riches hidden in the darkness and the things of great worth hidden in the secret places. Then you will know that the Lord God of Israel, who calls you by name, we will know God based on that. And what's powerful about this verse to me is that there are secrets only found in those places. There are hidden secrets found in places of difficulty, in seasons of darkness. There are things we will learn about God and about our trust in God that can only be revealed in times of difficulty. So look for those in this season. Hebrews 2:10 says this: He wanted to have many children share in his glory, so he made the one, Jesus, who leads people to salvation perfect through what? Through suffering. God made his holy son perfect. Jesus had to be made perfect through what? Through suffering, through difficulty, through struggle. And as Dr. Lee even quoted Romans 8:28, we know that in everything, God works for the good of those who love him. God works for the good. And sometimes we just have to trust his character. We know he loves us. We don't understand things that go on in the world. We have to trust the character of God. But even through these difficult times, there is something that can be gleaned from that, something we can take away, something that can be created in us that brings about good things. Let's talk about more than treading water. How do we grow during disruption? How do we create some growth? First of all, we want to develop that resilience, right? So we need to develop internal anchors. Sometimes when we are externally anchored to different things in our world, it's like sleeping on a boat in the ocean. If the wind's not blowing and it's not raining and everything's perfect, it's beautiful. But if the wind picks up and it starts raining sideways, we're afraid for our lives. In that analogy, we understand that we can internally anchor. We can anchor ourselves to things that we have some control over, that are stable, that are not in other people's acting right or good behavior. It's not in our world around us being stable, but we can anchor internally into the things that are strong inside of us. And these are things we can really cause less disruption to our lives as well too. So we want to put our energy into what's strong, not into what's wrong. It's so easy to focus, like we said, on the negative. We can develop resilience when we focus on what inside of us is strong right now and helping to develop those strengths. Maybe you're really good at reaching out and giving people hope. What can you do right now? Can you do a Facebook Live video? Can you connect with friends, 3 different friends a day? Can you post different things you've written, maybe some poetry or things you wrote? What can you do to develop what's strong in you and apply it to this situation, this scenario? And then we want to intentionally direct our efforts toward what we can control, like we said. You're going to develop an anchoring and a sense of resilience when you realize, even though things are chaotic on the outside, even though the wind picked up and it's raining sideways, you're okay because you have control in certain areas and you've anchored yourself to things that are stable. And then you want to build that system of self-care. You want to be able to take care of yourself and make sure you're okay. You want to develop those anchors in your life and those areas of your life that you can continue to do. Taking that walk every day. Or maybe it's what you do, that time of connecting with friends. Or maybe now it's every night board game night, and you turn on the board games and you have a good time and you just invest in that time together with your family. But whatever it is, develop those new areas of self-care. Let's talk about adding to the positives during the negative. Well, how do you add to what's positive? Because again, this is really difficult times. So first you have to identify what's positive. You can't add to what's positive if you don't know. So you need to do an inventory. Take an inventory of your life. What are things that are good right now? What are things that are solid? You connect and go with your family. That's great. Who do you have in your life that's positive? That's great. What are the things that really are going well? Things that you really can do, things you're enjoying, things that you really feel a sense of direction in. Maybe you're a student here at Regent and you're saying, hey, I'm still able to get my education, work on my education. Maybe you want to be a student, say, hey, you know what? I don't know how long this is going to go. Let me go back and work on this while I have this season in my life, whatever it may be. But identify that place. Identify what's positive in you right now. What do you have that is really beneficial, working, and strong? Then you want to grow it. And what I mean by grow it is, there's a very, very simple, simple idea and thought here that what we feed grows. What we starve dies. When you're dating somebody and you may be pouring into that relationship, wooing them, trying to develop a relationship with them. And then sometimes once you get married, you just get to this place where you stop making that investment. You're thinking, honey, I love you. If anything changes, I will let you know, but don't expect to hear it from me every day. Well, that's not going to work real well. So we need to continue to have that, because if you don't keep feeding it, it dies. You're like a plant, like your pets, anything like that. What you starve will die. If you starve your anxiety and you keep your attention on what's strong, guess what's going to die? Your fear and worry. If you feed what's strong in your life, if you feed the things that are positive, you're going to see those things grow, even in a time that's a negative season or a difficult season right now. So you want to place your focus and your energy on what's working and what's doable. Remember the pruning idea? You want to cut away the things that you want to die, like the negative thoughts, the negative attitudes, and put it onto the positive and say, what can I do to be a part of the positive here? And then you want to share that positive. So you identify it, then you grow it and you expand it. And it's going to be unique now. Whatever you used to do to grow the positive is probably going to be a little bit different now. And then you share the positive. You give it away. You want to find the intersection, it says here, of your strengths, your gifts, your abilities. You want to find where that intersects with human need. You want to look at where humans need. What do people need right now in this season that you have in your inventory to give? Now, if it's N95 masks, you know where to send them, right? The hospitals, they need those things. If you had that in your inventory, you would freely give that to make sure you met that need. But what is it that you have right now in that inventory? What can you give right now? And so when you identify what's positive, you grow it and you give it, you get a real sense of positive and purpose, even in a time where there's a disruption of that all across the world. And there's all different kinds of ways to cope. When we're talking about religious coping, I want to share a couple with you. I want to share a couple of verses with you that are really, really key to what we're thinking about here too. Psalm 91, 1-3 says this: those who go to God Most High for safety will be protected by the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, you are my place of safety, my protection. You are my God, I trust you. God will save you from the hidden traps, from the deadly diseases. And so that's a great verse. That whole chapter is an amazing chapter on what God will do to protect us in the midst of these things that are so difficult. Now, he relies on us to do our part, do everything we can. But in the time, remember, we social distance, we're taking care of the hygiene. But what about this fear we have of like, what if I catch this? That's where you can just trust and anchor yourself internally, anchor yourself in something greater than you, in God's word. Anchor yourself in God's character and say, that is what I'm going to stand on, because that's a foundation that you can trust and stand on. Hebrews 2:10, we talked about it a little bit here. No one will be able to stand against you, not even Hebrews. This is in Joshua, not in Hebrews 2:10. Moses said, no one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. Joshua 1:5. For I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. And that's a powerful thought. Throughout history, God has said, I will be with you. When you're afraid, nobody's going to be able to stand against you. I'm with you. I remember reminded with this verse of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if you remember the story of the fiery furnace. There was never a time in history before that people had survived a fiery furnace. It was never like a story they could quote back to, the plague of 1918. This is what happened. There was no previous fiery furnace tragedy back then. There was no such thing. And these guys said, we're not going to bow. We're not going to do what our God says not to do for you. And even if you throw us in a furnace, God will rescue us. How did they know that? And then they said, even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow. So they were like, we know our God's going to protect us because we are in this. We're going to do what he wants us to do. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow. And as you know from the story, Jesus appeared in there and rescued them. But what did they do? They trusted God's character, and they trusted that God loved them, even when they didn't know what would happen in the outcome. We can trust and rest in God's character. And I want to wrap up with this verse here too. Hebrews 12, 1-2. Great story, great example. You know, Hebrews 11 talks about all the great heroes of faith, all the great people who did great things standing up for their faith, and some who were executed for their faith. And I mean, it's an amazing chapter. And then right after that chapter, and there's no chapter breaks in the original text, but right after the list of all those people, the hall of faith, the word therefore says, oh, because of that, because of all that happened, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, with all these people watching us, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. Throwing off some of those fears, those anxieties, throw off the things that hinders us right now. What are the things we have control over we can throw off? The pruning. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Now, I think we can all agree this pandemic is part of the race that's marked out for us. If you're hearing my voice right now, and you're on the earth right now, unless you're in that great cloud of witnesses, you're here with us right now. This is part of the race we're all running. So we are going to run the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, not fixing our eyes on the media, not fixing our eyes even on the CDC, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We fix our attention, our eyes on Jesus. When we do that and we learn to cope in that way, we learn to say, look, I don't understand all that's going on, but I'm going to trust in Jesus, the one who's the author and the perfecter of my journey. He wrote this all out. He knew from beginning of time what was going to happen. He's the one I can trust during this season when I'm worried, when I don't know what the future holds. He's the one I can trust in during that time. So I really want to encourage you, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to just speak to you about some of these things, and that we had to share with you about a lot of this, what's going on here and what's happening. And I want to, again, we have these resources. We're going to try to get this PowerPoint to you guys and make sure you guys have access to it, so you are able to access a lot of these links and resources, and maybe even post some future times and things too. Hopefully this video is recording fine and will be available if people log in and you're able to, with this link, to watch it and go back over it if you have anything you wanted to check out or try to get some more information on. But we want to thank you so much for taking up an hour of your time tonight, and hopefully you were encouraged and educated and have a possible sense here of what we can do together during this time to really make the best of it. So God bless each of you. You're in our thoughts and prayers, and please reach out if there's anything we can do to support you during this time, because that's our highest priority too. Thank you.